late every night. After the last cars had left the parking lot and the heavy doors of the hall had been locked, the building seemed to transform into another world. The laughter, chatter, and music of earlier events faded away, leaving a quiet so deep it almost felt alive. The air grew cooler, shadows stretched across the floor, and the silence hung like a soft blanket. Rows of chairs stood neatly, all facing the grand stage, and the soft lights above cast warm reflections on the polished floor. In this stillness, very few people walked these empty halls, and one of them was the man who came to clean. He arrived quietly, pushing a small cleaning cart in front of him. Each step was careful, measured, so as not to disturb the echo in the vast empty space. He bent down to pick up discarded cups and programs, wiped sticky spots from the floor, and straightened chairs that had been knocked out of line. His movements were deliberate, precise. Years of working long hours had taught him the importance of efficiency. But even in his work, he treated the hall with respect. Every surface mattered, every detail deserved attention, and no task was too small to do well. He was a single father, and that truth shaped every step he took. His mornings began early, long before sunrise, tiptoeing through the house to wake his child gently. He made breakfast, checked school bags, reminded them of the day ahead, and often walked them to the bus stop or school. Even in exhaustion, he listened to their stories, their questions, and their laughter. Every small detail mattered because he knew that being present meant more than anything else. After sending his child off, his work didn't stop. Some days he took on extra jobs to make ends meet. Other days he dealt with errands, bills, or unforeseen problems. Life was often exhausting and money was always tight. Yet he moved quietly, carrying responsibility like a shadow that never left him. No one ever saw the long hours, the sleepless nights, the constant worry. To the world he was invisible, and over time he had learned to live with that invisibility, to embrace it even, but deep inside there was a quiet ache. It wasn't anger or bitterness. It was the feeling of being unnoticed, of living life fully but feeling unseen. Even when surrounded by people, he felt alone, carrying a weight that no one else could understand. Years ago, music had been his refuge. He remembered the first time he sat at a piano. The keys felt smooth, and the sound they produced seemed to fill not only the room but his heart. Music had been honest. Music had been a friend. Hours would pass without him noticing as melodies flowed from his fingers. Music allowed him to be himself, completely, without judgment, without expectation. It had been his escape, his solace, his voice when words failed, but life changed. Slowly at first, then all at once. Responsibilities grew heavier, loss arrived quietly but stayed longer than expected. He became a single parent, the sole provider, the one responsible for another life. Dreams were pushed aside. Music became a memory, tucked into a corner of his mind, waiting for a day that might never come. Survival took precedence, and every day became about providing, protecting, and persevering. This night began like any other. The event earlier had been loud, chaotic, full of laughter and chatter. Now the hall was silent, left with the remnants of the crowd, scattered programs, empty cups, and chairs slightly out of place. He moved through the rows methodically, sweeping, wiping, and straightening. His hands were calloused, his back ached, but he kept going, quietly determined to finish the work properly. When the floor was finally clean, he paused for a moment and looked toward the stage. The grand piano sat there under a soft spotlight, waiting silently. He had seen it countless times, but tonight something about it felt different. It didn't demand attention or recognition. It simply existed, quietly magnificent. He tried to ignore it. Touching the piano wasn't part of his job. He wasn't supposed to sit or play. Rules, responsibilities, reality, he reminded himself of all of it. But his feet moved before his mind could stop them. Memories began to surface, faint at first. Then clearer, he remembered the nights when music was his companion, the hours he would spend lost in the notes, forgetting the world outside. Music had been a release, a way to feel alive, to express emotions he could not say out loud. He remembered the sense of peace, the way melodies made heavy days feel lighter. and without realizing it, he had stepped closer to the piano. He climbed onto the stage and sat down on the bench. His fingers hovered above the keys. They trembled slightly, unsure, rusty from years of disuse. His heart beat faster, a mix of fear and excitement. He took a deep breath and pressed a single key. The note floated across the empty hall, soft and uncertain but alive. Then another note followed, and another. Slowly, a melody formed, delicate at first, but gaining confidence. It was imperfect yet real. Each note carried pieces of his life, struggles, late nights, sacrifices, small joys, and quiet hopes. The music wrapped around the empty chairs, filling the space with emotion. The hall no longer felt empty. It felt alive. For years he had kept this part of himself hidden. He had thought music was a luxury he could no longer afford. Responsibilities had taken over. But now, with each note, he remembered who he was. The piano didn't judge. It didn't demand anything. It simply allowed him to exist fully, to speak without words, to breathe. As he played, he became unaware of time. The aches in his back, the long day, the fatigue, all of it vanished. He was not a cleaner, not a tired father, not a man weighed down by responsibility. He was a musician again, free in a way he hadn't been in years. The melody ebbed and flowed, gentle and strong, sad and hopeful, carrying the depth of emotions he had kept bottled for so long. Unnoticed by him, a few people had returned to the hall. A staff member came in to retrieve something. A security guard wandered by. They paused, captivated, drawn in by the beauty of the music. They didn't want to disturb the moment, so they stayed quietly at the back, listening. One by one, others gathered, unable to resist the pull of something real and moving. The man played on, completely unaware. His shoulders relaxed, his breathing steadied, his face softened. Music had returned to him fully. It wasn't about applause or recognition. It was about honesty, about truth, about feeling alive again. Every note spoke of a life lived quietly, full of hidden strength and unnoticed courage. A whisper escaped someone at the back. "Who is that?" Another shook their head. "Does it matter? Just listen." The music grew slightly stronger, more expressive. It told a story of life's hardships, love, hope, and resilience. Every note held years of unseen effort and quiet sacrifice. The hall filled with sound, and the audience, though small, remained silent. Completely absorbed, he didn't notice when someone stepped closer, a young staff member with wide eyes. "Do you perform often?" they asked softly. He shook his head. "Not for years," he admitted. "Why?" "Life got in the way," he said simply. "Work, bills, my child, music. It had to wait." The staff member nodded slowly, understanding. For a moment, the hall was still, holding its breath. The man played the final few notes, soft, tender, and thoughtful. He allowed the last sound to fade naturally into silence. When he opened his eyes, the people had not left. They were standing quietly, moved, witnessing something rare. One voice broke the silence. "That was incredible." He looked up, startled. Recognition felt strange. Applause slowly began, gentle at first, then louder, until the hall filled with clapping. He smiled faintly, unsure how to respond. He had not expected anyone to notice, let alone be moved. An older staff member approached. "You've hidden this too long. Tonight you reminded us why we do what we do. Why music matters." His chest tightened. He realized that even invisible lives, even unnoticed moments, could touch hearts. Music had become a bridge between his hidden world and others' lives. And he felt something he had not felt in years. Hope. Slowly, he stood brushing off his clothes. The hall was quiet again, filled with the echo of what had just happened. He felt lighter. Music had returned not for the world, but for him. And somehow it had reached others too, quietly, sincerely, powerfully. Before leaving, he glanced at the piano once more. It had been a companion, a friend, a witness. Now it was a bridge, a reminder that life still held room for dreams, for courage, and for honesty. He picked up his cleaning supplies and finished his work, but the weight he carried for years had lifted. Even if just a little, walking out into the night, the cool air felt refreshing. The streetlights warmer, the world wider. Life was still demanding, responsibilities still waiting. But he knew now that even invisible moments could carry meaning, even quiet courage could ripple outward, touching hearts. Music had reminded him who he was, and he would never forget it. He sat for a few seconds, staring at the silent hall around him. The emptiness felt different now. The air seemed heavier, yet lighter at the same time. He didn't know how long he had been playing, but the small group of people standing quietly at the back of the hall had grown without him noticing. They weren't clapping or making noise, just listening, holding their breaths as if afraid to disturb the moment. He took a deep breath, finally realizing that something about the night felt magical. The melody he had just played had not been for anyone else, but it had reached them. It had reached the people who were standing silently in the shadows, reminding them that beauty could be found in unexpected places. That thought warmed him, though he didn't fully understand it yet. Slowly, one person stepped forward, a small smile on their face. Others followed. They didn't applaud at first. They simply watched, feeling moved by the honesty of what they had witnessed. Every note he had played was filled with something real, something human, something that no one could replicate with training or showmanship. It was emotion, pure and raw. The man still didn't notice them. His heart was beating fast, but not from fear. It was excitement, a small spark he hadn't felt in years. Music had always been part of him, but it had been hidden, locked away beneath responsibilities, sleepless nights, and endless chores. For the first time in a long time, he felt free. One person finally whispered, almost as if afraid to speak too loudly, "He's amazing." The others nodded silently, agreeing without words. The beauty of the moment wasn't in recognition or praise. It was in honesty, in the courage to let something forgotten return to life. Finally, he finished the last few notes of his melody. He let them hang in the air for a moment, fading slowly into silence. The hall was completely still, except for the soft sound of his breathing and the faint shuffling of the few people standing near the entrance. For a long second, no one moved. It was as if time itself had paused to acknowledge what had just happened. Then, softly, one person clapped. Just one, but it was enough. Another followed, then another. Soon, the hall was filled with applause, gentle at first, then louder as everyone realized they were witnessing something rare. He looked up, startled. He had not expected anyone to be there, let alone to clap. His hands were still resting on the piano keys. He stood up slowly, unsure what to do. His body felt tired from cleaning and from playing, but his spirit felt alive in a way it hadn't in years. The people who had gathered didn't approach him at first. They just watched, still captivated by what they had heard. A small voice broke the silence. That was incredible. He looked toward the sound and realized it was a young staff member, someone who had been working behind the scenes. Their eyes were wide, filled with awe. You didn't have to, they said softly. He shook his head. I didn't, he admitted. I wanted to. The words were simple, but they carried weight. They explained nothing and yet everything. The music had been for him, yes, but somehow it had reached others too. It had reminded them that even in invisible lives, beauty existed. That even when no one noticed, someone could still create something meaningful. Another person approached. This one older, someone from the event staff who usually oversaw logistics. You have a gift, they said quietly. You've hidden it too long? He laughed softly, embarrassed. It's been years, he said. I didn't think anyone would care. They shook their head. It doesn't matter if anyone thought you would. You made us feel something real tonight. The man looked down at the piano keys. They had been silent for so long, waiting for him to remember. And now they had become a bridge between his hidden world and the people around him. He realized something that he had long forgotten. Even small acts of courage could ripple outward, touching lives in ways he could not predict. One of the younger staff members stepped closer, still shy. Do you perform often? They asked. He shook his head. No, he admitted. I stopped years ago. Why? Another voice asked. He paused, thinking. Life got in the way, he said finally. Responsibilities, work, family, things that couldn't wait. Music. Music had to wait. The hall fell silent for a moment, and he felt the weight of that truth settle around him. For years he had hidden his talent, not out of shame but out of necessity. Life had demanded that he survive, that he focus on his child, that he keep going even when it was exhausting. He had done it, and he had done it well. But now, standing here, he realized that survival and creativity were not enemies. They could coexist. A soft murmur spread through the small audience of staff. Some looked at him with admiration. Some seemed inspired. Some, quietly, felt moved to think about their own forgotten dreams. The music had done more than entertain. It had reminded people that life was bigger than routines, that even invisible lives could leave a mark. He slowly stood from the bench, dusting off his clothes as though he had been caught doing something unusual. "I should finish cleaning," he said, half to himself, but the older staff members shook their head. "No, take a moment," they said. "You've earned it tonight. You reminded all of us why we do this work, why we show up, why we live." He felt a strange mix of embarrassment and pride. He wasn't used to being noticed, let alone praised. But the words touched something deep inside him. For the first time in years, he realized that being invisible didn't mean being powerless. That even a single act, like sitting at a piano in an empty hall, could reach the hearts of others. One person finally stepped forward. "You should play more," they said softly, almost a plea. "You have a gift. Don't hide it." He looked around at the small group. Their eyes were bright, their faces honest. And he realized something he hadn't admitted to himself. He missed music. He had buried it under responsibility, under exhaustion, under the endless tasks of life. But it had never left him. And now, for the first time in years, he felt it come alive again. He smiled, quietly, to himself. Maybe I will," he said softly. One of the younger staff members, a girl with wide eyes, stepped closer and whispered, "You've changed tonight. Not just the hall, but all of us." He nodded, not quite able to speak. Words felt insufficient. Music had always been better at saying what the heart felt than speech ever could. And in this moment, he understood that what he had done tonight was bigger than cleaning, bigger than responsibility. It was about courage, about showing up even when no one noticed, and about the quiet power of being true to oneself. The applause softened now, replaced by quiet smiles, nods, and thoughtful faces. They weren't leaving yet. None of them wanted to break the magic of what had just happened. He finally looked at the piano one last time. It had been a companion in his youth, a place where he had been free to express himself. And now it had become a bridge not just to the audience, but back to himself. He realized that the hall, the piano, and the empty chairs had waited patiently for him, and tonight he had returned something to them: music, emotion, and a reminder that life was still full of beauty. He picked up his cleaning supplies again, ready to finish his work. But he walked differently now, with a lightness in his step that hadn't been there before. His mind was clearer, his heart fuller. He knew that something inside him had shifted. Even small acts of courage could ripple outward, touching lives in ways he couldn't predict. Before leaving, he turned to the small audience once more. They waved quietly, smiling. He nodded back, feeling gratitude in a way he hadn't in years. Music had reminded them of something essential tonight. And it had reminded him, too, that even when life demands sacrifice, even when responsibilities weigh heavily, the heart has room for dreams. The heart, if given a chance, will always find its way back to what it loves. As he walked out of the hall into the quiet night, the streetlights felt warmer, the air felt softer, and the world felt bigger than before. His life was still full of responsibilities, still full of work and challenges, but it was also full of possibility. He had discovered that even invisible acts could create visible change. He had rediscovered music, courage, and a piece of himself he had almost forgotten, and he knew, without a doubt, that he would return to the piano. Not for applause, not for recognition, but for himself, for the love he had for music, and for the quiet power it gave him to feel alive, to touch others, and to remind the world that even the most overlooked lives have stories worth hearing. The night ended, but something had begun. And for the single father who had just cleaned a stage and played a piano, life would never feel quite the same again.